Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy,
where we're expanding the conversation around Catholic sexuality.
We're your hosts, Ellen and Kathleen. All right. We are back with another Charting Toward Intimacy episode. I'm Ellen. We have Kathleen with us.
I am here. Hello, everybody.
And today we are talking about communicating with your spouse. Now, we could talk for 6 hours about, 40 hours about communication. But what we're going to be talking about is how God is the model of communication for us in our marriages when it comes to pleasure, desire, those kind of things. And you're probably listening like, I'm sorry, what? God is the model of communicating pleasure to us? All right. Hear me out. Before we jump into this week's episode, I want to tell you about one of our partners, Tighten Your Tinkler. I know, really silly name, but you guys, this is a real and serious program. Tighten Your Tinkler is an at-home pelvic floor therapy program that I have personally used and I love. Jen, one of the creators of Tighten Your Tinkler, was actually on a podcast episode about a year ago. Please go check out that episode. I'm going to link it in the show notes. Here's my experience. After having 2 kids, I had some pelvic floor dysfunction, like most women. I had some tightening and loosening in different spots. This led to urgency, it led to leaking, and pain with sex. These are all very common, but as I learned when I talked to Jen on the podcast, not normal effects of pregnancy and childbirth. I bought this program and I got started. And 30 days later, I kid you not, 30 days, I had no leaking. Urgency was basically 0. Some symptoms I didn't even realize were from pelvic floor dysfunction cleared up. And best of all, the pain I had with intercourse disappeared. 1 month, you guys. The code CHARTING50 gets you $50 off the program, which gets you lifetime access to it. Please go check it out in the show notes and help yourself. Okay, so if you've been listening to the podcast, you've heard us say this before, that our marriage is an image of the relationship that God wants to have with his people, the church. And in a personal way, your marriage is the image of the relationship that God wants to have with you. Now our marriage helps us to understand that relationship, but we cannot place our marriage on top of the glory of God, and the mystery of God. So our marriages teach us something about the relationship. But the relationship that God wants to have with us is a perfect relationship because he is a perfect God, right? So anyway, relationship of man and woman, image of relationship of God and his people. So the way that God interacts with his people, he's giving us hints, clues, specific directions on how to interact in our intimate relationships. I've been reading through Leviticus lately, which is, it's tough.
It takes some effort.
It takes some effort to read through Leviticus.
Very intentional effort.
But here's the thing about Leviticus. I've really been enjoying it. It's been taking effort, but I've really been enjoying it because God very specifically explains how he would like to be worshiped, how we are to interact with him, our God, or the people of Israel, how the people of Israel are to interact with him when we have fallen short, when sin has happened, and I mean, to the nth degree of specificity, right?
That's what I was gonna say.
It's like if you bring a ram, you need to have your hand on the head of it when you bring it for slaughter. But if it's a she-goat, you don't need your hand on the head. I,
And even down to the size of everything, right? Like so many cubits by so many cubits, like
oh,
everything
right. All
be a
of the
different
temples that were
size,
built. Yeah.
the
Very
materials that things need to be made of, right? Like it's like made of acacia wood and then coated in gold, and like
right.
every tiny little detail is covered.
Is
You don't have one single question left.
yeah, it is all spelled out, right? You dip your hand in the blood and flick the blood 7 times toward the holy of holy. I was just like, what?
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
for a long time, I was always just like, okay, people have been telling me that God is, whole in and of himself, and he doesn't need our worship. So why is he so specific about how he wants to be worshiped? If he doesn't need our worship, why does that matter? Here's why it matters. Or here's a reason why it matters. I'm sure
Yeah,
there
how
is
it can
more.
apply.
Yeah. This is a way that you can apply it to your own life. Okay. So if God and the relationship that God wants to have with us humans is the ultimate goal, right? Our marriage is an image of that, helping us understand anything in the way that God relates with his people, or interacts with them should help inform how we should act in our own intimate relationship, particularly the ones that are the most intimate, right? So our relationship with our spouse, but also, relationships with our children and our really close friends. Because the relationship of God to his people is the most intimate.
Right.
So God is being so specific. He is laying it out. He is spending chapters upon chapters to explain how to build this temple, or how to specifically make a burnt offering of these 2 turtle doves, right? He spends so much time on these things, and he's so specific. That is an indication to us that when we want or need something in our relationships, we're called to very specifically lay it out.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, like, what happens in intimate relationships is, and this is kind of a cultural thing, and I think we get this from movies a lot in Hollywood, is that good relationships are just supposed to happen. My spouse is supposed to just know what I want and what I need. In anything, right? My spouse is supposed to know that when he gets home from work, I'm exhausted from being home with the kids. And so therefore, like, he should take the kids for a few minutes and give me 5 minutes. He should just know that. I shouldn't have to say that. My husband should know that I really need the bedroom to be clean before I can even consider being intimate with him in a sexual way. But my husband should just know that, right? My husband should just know exactly where to touch my body in order to ignite my desire. My husband should just know that. It's not something I should have to say. But here's the thing, is God never assumed that we knew how to worship him. God never assumed that we knew how to build him a good temple. He very clearly laid out the specificity of all of these things. And I mean, into like so much detail.
It's like really ridiculous.
It's
honestly.
ridiculous how much detail. So who are we to think that we don't need to be that detailed when we're interacting in our most intimate relationships and talking about what we want and need? Who are we to think that?
And I love when you first brought this up to me as like a potential topic, because it was like I was exactly the person that, listened to this episode and said, "What?" in the very beginning. I was like, "What are you talking about?" But yeah, like I love it because you have so many like ways of connecting married life as an icon to, like, to God's to the way that God is, to his very being. And it is such a cool thing, and it gives so much food for thought. And I'll say that like this is something that I struggle with, like
Mm-hmm.
how to communicate those things, right? And I think sometimes um some of us maybe also have trouble with like, well, what if I don't know what I want? You know, and
Sure.
um that becomes like a whole different question, right? It's like not even that sometimes maybe you aren't afraid to say what you want or to communicate what you want, but you don't even know what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a whole other side of the coin that I think is really interesting and that, you know, probably should be brought to prayer. And I know we've talked about, you know, like praying through your sex life, which, you know, we all feel kind of like is totally cringe,
Yeah, we're
right?
like, am I even allowed to pray
Yeah,
about
like
that?
why would
Like,
how do you do
Kathleen, I
that, right? But
remember one time you told me something like, "Can I pray my way to a higher libido?" And I just said, "Yeah, of course you can."
I'm trying to do it right now. So we'll
because
see.
because your libido
Yeah,
is important to your humanity, and of course God cares about it. And so no, it's not about, like, oh, I'll just, as long as I do a rosary every day, like I'm going to have a high libido in a
right.
month. Like that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like opening up this struggle that you have in
Yeah.
your most intimate relationship with another human and saying, God, please come and heal the things that are broken. Teach me how to get more in tune with my own body and my own humanity. Teach me
Yes.
how to be a gift to my spouse, right? All of those kind of things eventually are going to increase your libido.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Don't just like rely on supplements. Those supplements, you know, give them a shot if you want to.
Sure. Yeah.
But never underestimate the power of prayer,
Never.
even in things like libido. Yeah.
Exactly.
Um, but I think it's so helpful to really like for people who are maybe like me, right? Who are maybe struggling with low libido or um, you know, just struggling to really figure out what it is you want or desire or, you know, how to communicate those things or what to communicate. Um, I think it is really important, these analogies that we're talking about, to really sort of flip it and say, okay, what if I take my sex life out of this right now, right? And like, let me look at this through the lens of God and his people and
Hmm.
God and his church, right? And then to take that and apply it to your sex life, like sometimes it helps to make things a lot more clear.
Yeah.
Um, I know one time we talked about what was it? Prayer. You know, and how I don't remember if we talked about this on an episode or not, or if it was just in our personal musings. Um, but how we talked about like sex being a prayer, right? Like
Absolutely.
communication with your spouse and how prayer is communication with God and how sometimes you go through phases where you don't really want to pray. So does that mean that you don't pray? Or, you know, sometimes you might not feel like being intimate, but does that mean you just like not be intimate?
Hmm.
No. And how do you increase your desire for God, right? And then relating it to increasing your desire for your spouse. Like I have just found that looking at these things side by side in this way is really helpful to kind of put the spirituality of sex into perspective. Um, and such a cool thing that I don't know, hopefully everybody listening also can kind of is a helpful tool for them as well. But I just know I don't know, I'm like encouraging you right now because the ideas that you bring to this podcast and the connections, the biblical connections, the spiritual connections that you make are just so helpful and cool for those of us that are kind of like need the help right now.
Okay, I just want to say, like, I'm not over here sitting on my like golden throne. Like,
No, no,
I
no, of
have
course
this
not.
perfect like sex life and I understand these concepts perfectly. Like, I struggle to get the words out when I want to say something specific. Like, I'm I'm not saying that this is easy,
Right. No, 100%.
but I think that to this, like, twofold. I think this concept of allowing like the way that God speaks to his people Israel can kind of help us in two ways. One is it really just it gives us a model and can help us to recognize, like, okay, this is what God did in his most intimate relationship with a human. And so therefore, like, I should be modeling that. I should be modeling that specificity at every point that I can. And I should be asking for the things I want. I mean, that's really what God is doing, is he's asking for the things that he wants.
Right.
And he's asking for it in a really, really specific way. And so therefore, when, I'll go back to one of the examples that I gave. If you're home with 5 kids and you're homeschooling them and or maybe you're just home with 1 kid,
Yeah.
and you're exhausted by the time your husband gets home, not in the heat of the moment, at another time, later that night, maybe in the morning, say, hey, you know what would really help me is if you could take the kids for just 5 or 10 minutes, just, take them out on a walk, or, go in one of their bedrooms and grab a couple of books, and I just need 5 minutes. I want to go, wash my face or maybe hop in the shower, or I just want to sit where it's quiet, no one's touching me, right? Whatever it is that you want. But go and ask and be specific.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to challenge you to do. And if it feels too much to go the sexual realm, then like I just gave you a completely non-sexual example. Find something in your relationship that you can specifically ask for. And I think too, as we continue to practice this, because Kathleen, one of the things you were saying was, okay, what if we don't know what we want? Right. I know there is something in your life that you want from your spouse. It might be sexual. It might be completely non-sexual. Maybe you would like him to, put the dishes away in the morning or something from the dishwasher. Or maybe it's tiny. Maybe you just like want him to text you when he's headed home from work, or whatever it is, right? I know there's something, and you're thinking of it right now, and you're like, oh man, Ellen's right.
Yeah.
There's something you can ask for. And I want you to find some time this week. And again, not in the heat of the moment, not when it's like you want it the most, because typically we've got a lot of emotion like hanging out behind that. And then it becomes like this kind of nagging, or it comes out negatively, like you need to do this, blah, 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 right? But again, like go back to the Old Testament. In Leviticus, like God is not like, all of Leviticus is, God told Moses to say this, right? He's not like yelling all of these requirements down in anger, in wrath. Now, there are times when we see the wrath of God in the Old Testament. Not talking about that right now. We don't like, that's at least in the beginning of Leviticus. I haven't gotten through the whole thing. Maybe maybe you guys are like, Ellen's completely wrong. At least in the first half. No, I'm pretty sure I've read it before, but I'm like, coming back to it again. This is in a calm moment of communication with Moses. Mm-hmm. This is, hey, this is what I want. This is what I'm looking for. So find a calm moment to say, hey, this is what I want. This is what I'm looking for. And then like, see how that feels. Yeah. See how you're feeling about the fact that you just like asked for that, and also recognize like how that affects your relationship, and maybe the fact that you asked for something, then you got it, right? I think a lot of times one of the things that we're afraid to ask because we don't think we're going to get it.
Yeah.
And so, one way that you can kind of get past that fear is ask for something small first.
Yeah. And I would say too, and this is coming from someone who has started a boost my libido journey and trying to figure out all the many ways that we could do that, hopefully. One thing I'm learning is that a lot of the times the things that we think we want, like you use the example of the dishes, having him like asking him to do the dishes every day, or, whatever it is, like those things help to sort of take some of the, and I think with all of us, like, right, like women are like the most intense multitaskers of all time. Like we have 1,000 things in our head at all times. And sometimes it's like, yeah, just taking the dishes is one huge thing off my plate. But sometimes it's not just that. And sometimes you might find like, yeah, I asked him to do the dishes and he started doing the dishes, but I'm nowhere closer to like a higher libido.
Sure.
Like, why is that? And it's because we need to actually make more time for just rest, and not in the sense of like making sure things get done, but like maybe asking other people to do them, but in terms of like stepping back and from all of the things that need to be done
Mm-hmm.
and allowing yourself to just sort of be and rest in leisure. I am awful at leisure. My husband like tells me all the time, like, for goodness sake, have you ever heard of leisure? And it's like, no, there's no time for leisure. Like, what are you talking about? But I'm starting to realize that, and we haven't had the conversation yet, but one thing that I am planning to ask for is one night a week where I can go out and do whatever I want
Oh, I love
by
that.
myself, not even taking the baby, right? Just like one night a week where if I want to go walk around Target, I just go walk around Target. If I want to go to a bookstore and read with a coffee, that's what I do. If I want to go meet up with a friend for dinner or drinks, that's what I do. If I want to go get my nails done, that's what I do. But just one night, if I just want to go sit in my car somewhere eating Chick-fil-A, that's what I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't matter, but just one night a week where I can just be leisurely on
Yeah.
my own, doing whatever it is that I want. Because so much of libido and desire and all of this is, I mean, for women, it's like 90% mental, you know? And
Right.
if we're just trying to find more efficient ways of being productive, it's not allowing us to actually rest and sort of get into that mental space. We need actual leisure,
Mm-hmm.
which again, I'm almost 35 years old and I'm just realizing this now. Like, wow, I need to allow myself leisure,
Yeah.
right? And so it's, I don't know, we sort of like ended up kind of morphing the topic a
No,
little
I
bit,
think
but
I think that was such a good point because we also need to like keep in mind when we recognize something that we want and we ask for it, something else that's really helpful to communicate is what we expect to feel because of that, right? So,
right.
again, we'll go back to my example of like being really exhausted when your husband gets home, like from being with the kids, right? So, including also like, I want, can you take them for 5 or 10 minutes so that I can just take some deep breaths without kids touching me, and I hope that that's going to help me reset and refresh so that I can finish the rest of the night strong with you, and we'll get
Mm-hmm.
we'll get through dinner together, and we'll get through bedtime, and
Yeah.
and I'll be in a better mood, right? Like, also, identify for yourself what you're expecting to feel from that, and then also communicate that, right? I'd really like you to unload the dishwasher because it's just so helpful if we can start a day with an empty dishwasher so that every time the kids are I'm speaking from a stay-at-home mom perspective, like
Right, yeah,
all of my
exactly.
examples are that, right? Just like every time that we have like meal or snack, I can just immediately put the dishes in the dishwasher, don't have to worry about the fact that it's full of clean dishes, and it helps keep the house clean, and I think I'm gonna feel more peace with that, right? Identifying like what you're gonna feel and communicating that, because I think too, when we ask for something and we explain a why behind it, there's more interest in the person we're asking, right? Like, hey, I want you to unload the dishwasher. It's like, oh man, my wife's just nagging me to do chores, right? Hey, I want you to unload the dishwasher because it's going to give me more peace. And it's
Mhm.
actually going to make me a better mom and a better wife to you if you could help me with this one chore, right? It's like, oh, wow, I want to do that,
Yeah.
right? So like, I think that's key. And then also, I mean, just on this rest thing, because that is a bit tangential, but like, let's go back to the Old Testament.
Yeah.
God specifically, we're
Yeah.
so used to hearing Sabbath. We're so used to it because like we grew up in a Christian-ish culture, like Sunday, even still like in the United States, and it's way better in other countries. Like most companies don't work on Sunday. A normal corporate job is going to be Monday through Friday. Like, there's still this element of like weekend and rest. We're so used to that. When God spelled that out for the people of Israel, that was insane. Insane to not work for one of the days of the week. That's like, it was so countercultural that these, the people of Israel, like they didn't work one of the days. And like when people saw that, it was just like, what are they doing? There's something different about this group, right? So anyway, like again, taking God's relationship with his people as our model, like he told his people to rest. He told his people to, to find ways to rest, right? So that's really important.
He didn't just tell us to rest. He himself rested.
Right.
Right. Like, it's, I don't know. It just like reveals so much. It reveals so much when you're able to put these things side by side, be like, maybe I'm exhausted and struggling in every possible way because I'm doing it totally wrong.
Yeah. So, too long didn't listen. Not that anybody skips to the end of a podcast episode, but let's just like, I'm challenging you to find some time this week to ask for one thing from your spouse. And if even that feels too scary, then think about another intimate relationship that you have. Maybe a child or a friend, maybe one of your parents, or an aunt or uncle, like somebody that you're close to. If your husband feels like too big of a step. But I want you to do this with your spouse. So I'm really gonna encourage you to do that. But find something that you can ask for. Now, if you can ask for something sexually, that's like top notch. I'm giving you 2 thumbs up, right? But if that's too much, and I totally get how that feels like too much, find something non-sexual that you can ask for and be specific. Explain exactly what you want done, why you want done. But again, don't do this in the heat of the moment. Find a quiet time, a restful time to explain this. So maybe all the kids have gone to bed. Hey, can I talk to you for a sec? And just really like lay it out. Now, here's the other thing you can do is go read Leviticus. To get an idea of what we're talking about. I mean, you could even just read the first 2 chapters of Leviticus and you'd understand like what we're talking about with the specificity and how specific, or go read the Noah's story about exactly how the ark needs to be built. There's tons of examples throughout the Old Testament of this specificity of God in his conversation with his people. And so that's my other kind of challenge for you is go crack open your Bible this week and find one of those sections. Leviticus is a great place. Like, you could open to any point in Leviticus and be like, wow, this is really specific. And allow that to be the model, right? Allow that to inform, how you should be asking for these things. And as you ask, you'll get more confident in asking. And this can become a regular part of your communication.
Yeah.
And you can encourage your spouse to do the same, right? How great would it be if we knew exactly what would make our husbands feel honored and loved?
Yeah.
Guess what? True. They could tell you.
Gotta ask.
You gotta ask for it, right? Yeah. And like, again, this is a slow process. You might not immediately be able to jump in, like, and right before or during sex say, you know what? I need you to move your fingers to the side because like what you're missing the clitoris, and it's not where you might not be there. I'm not sure any of us are, but that's a good place to get.
That's so funny.
But you might be ready to say, hey, could you give me 5 minutes when you get home? Could you take the dog for a walk? Could you take out the trash on Wednesday nights? Whatever it is.
Yeah.
What other thoughts do you have before we close out?
I don't know. I think that kind of sums it up. Although, as you were just saying, like verbally, communicating sexual desire, or wants or needs, um, just to even soften that a little bit, like, right, like there are a lot of us that probably are not there, right, to be like, hey, could you please move those fingers,
Yeah.
like, right, but even like just not saying it, but just using your own hand to guide.
Yeah.
And then
Move the hand over.
afterwards,
Yeah.
exactly. And then afterwards being able to say, hey, I realized this time around that I like it more when, right? Like,
Yeah.
or whatever it is, like that's another way to sort of soften that. So it's not just this like verbal, like, I don't know what I'm doing and this is very strange, but come to sort of like a debrief afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, this time around, this is what worked really well. This is what not so much. Consider doing that.
And that's actually like a
moment.
phenomenal time to talk with your partner, because you have just like had sex and you're feeling very close to each other, right? It's actually a really like good time.
Oxytocin is strong.
You have those hormones, your husband has those hormones, and like you're actually like willing to be a lot more open in conversation. That's a really wonderful time to have conversations like that.
So just a final thought, food for thought.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.